What's up, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this session of the BackWoods, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the hilarious of our outdoor adventures. Joining me in the woods today is a wilderness skills instructor and field tester, Joe Price. My name is Daniel Turnipseed, and you're listening to the BackWoods. All right, everyone, joining me via live video call is Joe Price. Joe Price, I just wanted to say first off, welcome for joining me on the podcast. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to have a wilderness instructor on the podcast with me.
I really appreciate being asked, dude. I've seen your current lineup of guests, and I'm humbled to be a part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome being able to bring on all these sorts of different backgrounds and stuff. And I actually did think you were in America. I didn't realize you were not in America.
I do get that a lot because being a wilderness instructor, at least on the way that I do it, I travel a lot. So, and I don't have that generic Conor McGregor Irish accent. So I can get it. You know, people do think I'm Australian and here, there, and everywhere in between. So it's understandable.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the wilderness people that I watch, more like just the Discovery Channel stuff, it's always America. It's always American survival experts. And so in my mind, I'm like, survival experts are from America. And I guess I got to get that thought out of my head because it's not true.
Yeah, well, I mean, in all fairness, shout out to America and all my American friends, is that a large amount of survival experts do come out of America. I mean, you produce them, you know, from military experience and everything else like that. In Europe, it is not so common to use that title. You know what I mean? So we do have this, like, you get more wilderness. It's more wilderness skills and bushcraft orientated. I mean, it's all from the same cloth, but it's just different terminology.
Before we get into the good, the bad, and the hilarious stories, for the viewers who are watching that know you and for the viewers who don't know you, would you be able to give a brief summary of who is Joe Price?
Yeah, well, it's Joe Price, a brief summary. A father of two. I live in Sweden. I enjoy long walks to the fridge and reading about the beach. I'm a wilderness instructor for the past 6 years now. I've worked with great people like Dave Canterbury from the Pathfinder School and John Bow from Wilderness Ways. And I've worked from Japan to America and back again. It's been a great experience, and I love being a wilderness skills instructor. But now I'm kind of taking a larger step into bringing that collective knowledge into product design and product development for large companies out there.
Yeah, and I've seen that you have the bow drill manual that you've produced and then the feathering manual that you've produced.
Yeah.
I was looking at those earlier, which I find is pretty cool. One of my previous podcasts, I talked with Ray Livingston from
Amazing
Alone.
guy.
And his number one thing for survivalists was to make sure you can start a fire. And so when I saw those books, I was like, that's pretty cool, because that's literally what he said. And so I guess it's that way across the board. Make sure you can start a fire because you're going to need it.
And you can take Ray's word to the bank on that. And I mean, it's interesting because I learned the lesson about bow drills the hard way. You know what I mean? Bow drill is a forever humbling experience. And it's humbled me on more than one occasion. But when I first started out, going to shows and going to classes and stuff like that, which I recommend everybody does. You know, you can have all the dry food and knives that you want, but classes is really where it's at. And I went to this particular festival because I have a Facebook page, and we hosted a small gathering, and it was very early days, kind of 2015. It was probably about 7 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago at this stage. And there was a guy doing a bow drill demonstration there. And I would consider myself, or I started off as a survivalist. So for me, it was all about navigation, knowing how to shoot, you know what I mean? Stamina, all the CrossFit kind of stuff. And, you know, there's no situation that you couldn't fight your way out of, basically. That's the typical mentality. So when I started to explore the world of wilderness skills and bushcraft, when you start getting into hand drills and pine pitch glue and birch baskets, it all seemed a little bit more all show, no go, you know, at least I thought at that particular time. So when this gentleman was doing the bow drill demonstration, I was entertaining a class on like how to pack your bag and what to carry in the woods. And he was over here and he came over and he asked me for my help. And then, pride and ego was a big part and is a big part of everybody who starts out in this. You can get sucked into it really quick when you got YouTube and stuff and everything else. So this crowd came over to me, and the only reason why I was so snarky about it was just because I could do it, but I didn't want to look like a fool. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So rather than being humble about it, like I would today, and say, "Hey, I have never made a flint tip arrow before. How about you show me and
Hmm.
I can learn?" I turned around to him and I said, just off the cuff, and I said, "Hey, I'm a survivalist. If I'm in a situation that needs a bow drill, I'm in a situation that a bow drill can fix." And everybody laughed, and it didn't feel good, and I could see the dejected look on that guy's face because that was the class that he was there to do. And I said to myself, "No," I said, "No, that just wasn't right." I said it
Hmm.
didn't feel good in here. So I finished up my lesson and I went over and I apologized to that guy. But luckily, he was a humble dude. And he says, "Hey, no, I totally understand, Joe, but this is something that you got to get doing." And I've almost been making amends for that
Hmm.
incident ever since. And I think now I'm probably into a couple of thousand bow drills all over the world. It's the one thing I get asked to do all the time. The Lord up there is punishing me, but he's making me sure I learn my lesson. So now I've got a book out about it, a little field guide for beginners out about it. And whenever I go to a show of all the skill range I have, everybody's like, "Joe, you're the bow drill man. Do the bow drills." I'm like, "Okay." And it's a truly valuable skill. So that was the start into bushcraft for me, and
Hmm.
away from the more heavy survivalist stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's awesome because me and my brother as kids, we would
Mm.
always try to make bow drills. Not very
Yeah.
successfully, but we would always try them. I remember at one point we were out elk hunting and we needed a
Mm.
fire. And so
Oh,
we took
awesome.
off our shoelace and we tried to make one. And we tried for like 30 minutes. And I don't know if we were using the wrong wood or didn't put enough pressure on it,
Mm.
but it just wouldn't work. And it's, I know it once you get the method down, it's a fairly
Yeah,
simple method,
of
but
course.
I still to this day have not been able to do it. I don't
Oh,
know if
well,
I I
it's
might need your manual.
here. Look, you're more than welcome to it. We can work something out for you and your listeners after the show. But it's one of those things, like everything else that's out there, that it's more like in the manual. I talk about it more like starting a car. Like everybody, it has to kind of get over this whole fear. Like I had that particular
Hmm.
day when I was first encountered it. This pride, this ego, this fear of failing, because like everybody here, most people and most of the listeners and watchers of this show can drive an automobile, whether it's stick or
Hmm.
manual, it don't matter. But I think everybody can relate back to when they first got into a car at 14, 16. It's like a space shuttle, and yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's like trying to play drums, this stick and this foot, and
Uh-huh.
it's crazy. But then you stick at it, you put in the repetition, and one day you get in the car and now people can do it without thinking. And there
Hmm.
is nothing in the woods or nothing in the forest that is in any way alienated to anybody. You
Yeah.
just have to put in those like 5 or 6 driving tests, and then once you get
Hmm.
it, like it was the same with myself when I first started to bow drill and make fires. It was crazy. It was like trying to teach an octopus how to ride a bicycle. You know what I mean? Because I'm a big guy, I'm an awkward shape. I'm 6'2", and I'm not exactly
Uh-huh.
foldable in half, so it takes a bit. But I had an amazing teacher, an amazing guy called Shane Phelan, who actually has released a knife for Tops there recently. So congratulations to Shane if he's watching this. He's a great friend. But he said to me, "Here, look, Joe, I'll pop up and it showed me what being learning from somebody who's an expert can really do for you. So he
Yeah.
said, "I'll come up to your home." So, and I mean, Shane's a big guy. He's even bigger than me. Loads of tattoos, and he's a biker and stuff like that. And he knocks at my door, and my mom answers it. She's like, "Oh, hello." He's like, "I'm Joe's friend." And he came in, and in my backyard, and I tell this to anybody who's practicing skills, your backyard is just as great as anything. We don't have to go off into the Andes. We sat out in my backyard. I made a video for my Facebook group, and something that I was struggling with for maybe 6 months, within 15 minutes, done,
Hmm.
sorted. He was able to. It's almost you elk hunt. We said that you,
Hmm.
you go hunting. So
Yes.
the difference between trying to figure it out on your own, or I used to be an amateur shooter. I used to compete in shooting myself, and the difference it made to me having somebody like Shane there was you could be shooting at a target over and over and over again. But then a coach or someone more experienced will come along and just kick your ankle a little bit, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're hitting
Hmm.
bullseyes. But they
Yep.
know, and it's so worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah. Well, and that's just you mentioning you don't have to go out into the woods. Here is what we call it. But the funny thing is, in all of my videos, it looks like I'm out like in the back, in the middle of the forest. But my house is 5 minutes from here. And
Perfect.
I'm right next to a public park with a ramada and a restroom and stuff. It's just not a very busy public park, so I can come out here and film podcasts. But it just
It's
cracks me up
brilliant.
because you can just use your backyard if you need to. Go out
You
and
can.
do what you need to. You don't have to be in a desperate, I'm going to die in this situation. I need to teach
That's the
someone how to
last
get
place
out
you
of
want to
it.
be. That's
Yeah. And
definitely
it,
the
it
last
just
place you want
reminds
to be.
me back in Bear Grylls' days when he had Bear
Mm,
Grylls, the show.
mm,
He in one of his episodes was on like this giant crevice in the middle of the desert floor, and he was
mm,
talking about how you don't want to try to cross over something like this because it could end up being
mm.
deadly. And it made me laugh because I know it was for TV and it's more of the educational purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
But somebody on the internet went and found the location where he filmed it.
There's a whole
And
YouTube channel about it when you go
yeah,
around.
and the channel that he jumped over ended like 20 feet from him, and he could have just went around it. And I'm laughing because I'm like, I understand what you guys are trying to say. Like, he did it fake, it was wrong, but there was a lesson behind it. It didn't
There
have to
was.
be some intense, deadly situation. He was trying to teach you how to prepare for these situations. So,
Of course, and I think like all credit to Mr. Grills. You know, we've chatted recently, but Bear is in a whole upper echelon
mhm,
of what he does. And you know, my father, who I lost recently, he always showed me like to look at the measure of a man's character. You know what I mean? And that even if you don't like somebody, because my father was a construction worker, he's like he told me about, say, bricklayers, which he
mhm,
absolutely hated, but he never said they were bad bricklayers. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Because they weren't. That's something that they earned and couldn't be taken away from them. And
yeah.
something has to be able to do that. And I think if you go on the Bears Wikipedia page, and which the people never do, you know, and I understand they see the Orange Knives and the Bear Grylls Academy,
uh,
and I get it. But if you go on the Bear Grylls Wikipedia page, the man is one of the most legit you'll ever see. You
mhm,
know what I mean? The stuff that he has accomplished since the age of 16 is astounding. And it's not like that he is unbalanced in the sense, in like, yeah, he gets with one hand, but he's also head of the scouts. He runs a ministry, you know, all free of
mhm,
charge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I can understand where people come from. And there can also be an awful lot of envy in this world as well, which can be a bit
mhm,
strange. But I find that I'd rather look at some of the survivalists you see on TV and judge them by the merit of what they're trying to teach. You know what I
yeah.
mean? I don't mind if somebody is showing a ferro rod technique at the back of a gas station somewhere,
Mhm,
like, you know what I mean? But if the ferro rod technique is legit, what are you criticizing? You're just
mhm,
being petty then. It's like the way you see people, and you see it in the YouTube section of comment sections, and I'm sure you get it, where people are like, oh my God, he's wearing Fial Raven. You know what I
mhm,
mean? And it's like, yeah, but are you just looking for something to criticize?
mhm.
Why don't you criticize, or is it because you don't have the experience? Why don't you criticize the technique he's shown? So we can
Mhm,
all learn something, because I believe critique is important. But no, it's always these low brow, low vibrational kind of
mhm.
things. And I tend to steer clear of them, especially because I'm in the social media space. It can become very empowering. You know what I mean? Or not
Yep.
empowering, the opposite of depowering. Like it can strip you down of any confidence you have very quick, very quick.
Yep. Well, and that's why they always say don't read the comment section
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
it'll destroy you if you personally are more sensitive on the
Mm,
aspects of what people say.
mm.
I would say just don't look at your comments in general, um, because I've had some mean comments, and
Yeah.
I actually posted on my Instagram. It's not huge. I have 1,000 followers, but
Mm,
I posted on there a reel, and I basically in the comment section nicely told them to back off, and if your comment
mm,
isn't nice, it will be deleted. So I'm like,
mm.
don't even waste your time and post it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I'm not the type of person who will just let those comments slide. I don't get a
Mm,
whole ton of comments anyway, so I can
mm.
actually go through and filter them. And so if somebody's rude in the comments or is being rude to somebody else in the comments, I'll just delete them. And
Yeah.
like, no, there's an
Mm.
extent that I will allow. Like one of the people, because I do post fossil stuff, and one of the people was like,
So cool.
people, they were like, this mosasaur never existed. It's just a weird shaped rock. And I could have
Mm,
deleted it, but it generated another 38 comments underneath
Yeah.
theirs as replies. And so I was like,
Yeah.
well, I'll use the attention as a
That's
benefit,
it.
but sometimes I have to delete it. It is what it is.
Oh, of course, and I'm the same. I think if once because I have a community, you know,
Hmm.
that I've curated with some great guys over the past kind of 7 or 8 years, and in that community there's 10,000 people, and we have an ethos, and that's what I recommend that most people try and practice, especially if you're, you know, growing your
Hmm.
channel like the way you are now, and it seems to be growing well, and you produce great
Hmm.
content, is to is a thing, and I may be pronouncing it wrong because it's just off the top of my head, and I'm terrible with Latin. It's called I think it's the agrarian dialect. You know what I mean? And what people, especially in my community, it's called living to learn. I don't even have bushcraft or survival in it because if people find me, I want it to be almost like the Illuminati.
Hmm.
That's a door shaking.
Yeah.
They've been asking questions and following the right rabbit, and they found it. There's too many people get attracted by the word survival and bushcraft into
Hmm.
forums. But me and the guys all sat around together and we were like, right, well, what do we want from this space? You know, do we want it to be all full time? Check out my YouTube video. This is my survival knife gear pictures, or do we want it to be a certain way? You know,
Hmm.
or do we let it grow organically, or can we curate it? And that's where the agrarian dialect comes in. So the 10 of us originally said, right, well, if if we want to see content of a particular type, we have to produce content of a particular type.
Yeah.
So all the 10 guys set out about doing that. They all had their different skill sets. But then in the comment section of all the Facebook posts and videos that we posted at the time, they we spoke the language that we wanted spoken back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then once you develop this hierarchical kind of culture, well, then you will attract like for like. You know what I mean? And then that's what happened. And it's a hard thing to do. But over the past 9 years of social media, I talk the way I expect to be talked at in my comment
Yeah.
section, you know. And then I find that I call them seagulls, and I know this is a family friendly podcast,
Hmm.
but seagulls are what I like to call those internet people who swoop in, make an awful lot of noise, and defecate on things, and then go away. You know what I mean? And just like seagulls, if you don't feed them, they don't hang around too long. You
Uh,
know what I mean? They're only looking for controversy. So now it got crazy there for a while, but now for the most part, I'm surrounded by a great bunch of supporters and followers and fans that
hmm.
that can that have mastered their tongue. And if I put up something that they don't agree with, they can tell me why they don't agree with it, and then we're cool. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that the internet needs more of, you know, in all
Hmm.
fairness, because it's stuff gets derailed way too fast. And I'm sure you understand that in the fossil world, because when you're working in the broader spectrum of social media, when people
Hmm.
first join it, and you want to start your bushcraft page, and you're just figuring yourself out, you know, is my
Yeah.
camera here, where do I go, and what skills am I going to show? And it's exciting, that you can be derailed by these comments that just bear no semblance to you trying to
Hmm.
figure yourself out. But then once you become niche and you start getting 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers, 3,000 followers, all of a sudden, then the fossil nerds,
Yeah.
that's a whole, like, if you start off down here with the common folk, there's the nerds up
Hmm.
here, you know what I mean, just waiting to swoop down on you. And I love talking to them. I am a nerd myself, but they can be vicious in a whole other way. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? They have a thing called tact, and that's something that people have to learn how to do. And I think Winston Churchill quoted it best when he said, tact is the ability to tell someone to go to hell and have them thank you for it. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
people need to develop that.
Well, and the finding your audience, it cracks me up because I am a devout Christian in my own
Same.
life. And so I also do fossil hunting. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people that are instantly like, those don't
Ah,
correspond because
yeah, 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 yeah,
the
yeah.
Bible disproves the dinosaurs. And there's a whole other conversation on that, but I'm like, you
Mm-hmm.
can't necessarily say that because the evidence is there. We don't
Yeah,
know when they were created. They were a part of creation. And so
yeah.
why not explore? The name of my
Mm.
channel, my main channel, is Discover Creation. So I'm like, we
Mm-hmm.
discover everything. And
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it was alive at some point, that counts.
yeah, yeah.
it's
That's it.
it,
It's in the
it's
ground
a
or something.
yeah, it's something. It was there. It's not just a rock
Mm.
in a random shape. Um, okay, well,
But
let's go ahead and
go for it.
go ahead.
No, no, I'm just saying that, like, people have to step outside themselves, because I would be
Hmm.
the same. I I had faith, like we all do as a kid. Then as a teenager, I'm like, dealt with the system. You kind of lose it for a little bit, and then I found my faith again.
Yeah.
And everybody practices in their own way. But I would be what I often hear referred to as a red letter Christian. So, you know, that's the way I kind of work it. And it's great because most people in the States have been aware for that. I usually have to explain it to a European audience. But I think it says more about people have to take a step back and put on this kind of social media Teflon armor, especially if you're going to be a survivalist or a bushcrafter or a wilderness instructor, and realize that not everything, you know, you got to lose that ego thing, that not everything that's thrown at you on the internet is thrown at you that you have to absorb personally. You know what I mean? I've had people like that. I'd like to put some Bible quotes in my post. I think the Bible and nearly all religious textbooks are fantastic and have wisdom in them that we can, you know, if science is explaining the universe, religion and philosophy and psychology are explaining people, and that's the way I look at it. And the day we can marry the two is going to be a very special day for humanity. But I've seen it when I have just like the Fjallraven trousers, or like, you know, you use a certain knife that somebody doesn't like. It's more them saying something about themselves than it is you. You know, it's kind of like when it's the biggest flaw you find in your partner is actually your biggest emotional need. You know what I mean? So when somebody comes along to me and says, hey, this 20-minute video that you put up, and the one thing they focus on is my Bible quote that I just put in there for a bit of inspiration, well, then that says more about the person making the comment. If they give out of 20 minutes, this is what they picked. And that could be for anything. So it's a good bit to remember when you move forward in your journey in the outdoor space, because it's not devoid of people who are making sense of the world.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on into the good, the bad, and the hilarious of the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
I know, I'm looking at the time. I'm like, oh, we've gone 24 minutes now, and we haven't even gotten
I love a good discussion, my friend.
It's been going good. I didn't even realize. Okay, but yes, the good. And I know we've already been talking about some of the good, but in terms of what you do, the knowledge you have behind survival and being able to go out and teach people, what is the good things that keep you doing what you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's like Tecumseh said, you know, if you wake up in the morning and you don't have something to be thankful for, that's your problem. And I'm so thankful for all that I do. But I think the thing that keeps me going the most is the amount of PMs and DMs that I get, you know, that I'm like Bob Ross. So I know what it's like I remember back in the day when I wrote on forums, and I remember I sent a message to Dave Canterbury. You know, I was like, hey, Dave, I really like your knife. And he wrote back to me and he said, good, you know, that's great. Yeah, I'm glad you like it. And I was like, oh my God. And that energy, that buzz, you know, I'm just this guy on my couch. I didn't know I was going to be an instructor for him in a couple of years, but I'm just sitting on my couch going, you know, oh, that's amazing. I've got to escape out of this little world, and someone has recognized me and talked to me. And I never forgot that feeling, and I always believe in repaying those things. So the thing that keeps me going the most is that I remember reading this story from Bob Ross, and he said that that up until the day he couldn't, he responded to every bit of fan mail he got, you know. And I said to myself, right, that's going to be me. If anybody takes time to, whether it's to say hello to me or ask me about equipment, so I stay at it, and I must get, much to the annoyance of anybody in my presence, probably between 150 to 250 DMs, PMs every day of people just reaching out and talking and sharing their life stories or asking questions. And I absolutely adore it. It takes me about 4 hours out of my day to answer them all. But I wouldn't miss it. I think that's the best. Getting to meet so many folks from around the world is just beautiful.
Well, and I totally understand, because doing a podcast like this, I have to reach out. And so a lot of my messages get left unread. And it's like, you can see that they read it, and I just gotta be like, okay, well, they're not interested, and I move on to someone else. But when people like you do respond, it's like, it makes my day. I remember, cause Ray Livingston, he was my first TV personnel to ever respond. And I had only one episode of the podcast up at the time. And when he responded, I was like speechless, and I was sitting there with my wife, and I was like, oh my gosh, like,
yeah, exactly.
He responded. And not only did he respond, but he responded with a voice message. And
Oh
I was like,
wow.
that's even better because
Yeah.
most people wouldn't even take the time to do that. But I totally
Mm,
know what you're talking about. And for you, when I messaged you with what you're going through right now,
I
to
appreciate that.
say
Yeah.
yes,
Mm,
and then after you saying yes to find out what happened, I was just like, oh wow, and it made me feel exceptionally grateful because even
mm.
though you're going through hardships right now, you are still willing to come on to a podcast that only has 2 episodes up and
Yeah.
still do
But
the
it's
podcast.
I never forgot it, and I think that's, it's something that an awful lot of the people who I've been surrounded with has taught me is that, when you stop thinking that what you have is privileged, well, then
Hmm.
you're in a very dangerous territory, and only for, like, I made this live video back in the day, and I tell this story all the time, but basically when I started my group, I had the Dunning-Kruger effect, thought it was fantastic. I had a small group of friends that were all really good at what we did, and I decided to make a live video. I made a live video where I was making a smoker with a tarp over the top of it, and I was doing a piece to camera,
Hmm.
the audience was there, and it was good feedback. But while I was talking, the smoker just burst into flames, just
Oh,
absolutely, just completely behind me, just went up into flames. I think it's still on my Facebook page because I don't hide any of that stuff either. But certain people reached out to me after that and said, "Hey, you've got good skill, but you're rough around the edges," and so much of that happens in people's careers.
hmm.
I mean, whether you're Ray or Donny Dust, if it hadn't been for a stranger in the 11th hour or somebody reaching out, my little Facebook group wouldn't have been anything.
Yeah.
When I was started out with the guys, we had this idea, but we can't take all that credit. There's a great guy in the UK called Zed Shah. And just
Hmm.
like yourself, I reached out to him one day. He was going through some stuff. We talked for a little bit, and then we said no more after that. And then 2 months later, all of a sudden, my Facebook group is like 100 members, 200 members, three, four,
Uh-huh.
five, six. And I was like, what's after happening here? And Zed had taken time out to mention us in a video. And I never forgot that. And I said, right, that's something else now that I have to repay on my journey going
Hmm.
forward. So I would, I never, I never say no when anybody's reaching out and trying to make a good name for themselves and add to the conversation, which is a very
Yeah.
small conversation. So anything that adds to the conversation of the outdoor space, well, then
Hmm.
it's never a bad thing. Never a bad thing.
Well, yeah, and especially in the world we live in, because so many kids and the younger generation. I myself, I'm only 23, but
Mm-hmm.
I was like right on the verge of the tech boom and kids being
Mm.
absorbed into the digital world instead of the real world. I was just lucky enough that my parents didn't allow the tech, and so we were forced to go out and experience the real world.
Good move.
Yeah, and so I completely appreciate the that because there's a lot of kids who need this. They need, as much as we don't want them to be absorbed into social media, they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
absorbed into social media anyway.
Yep.
And there needs to be a good presence besides all the junk that's on there. And so to
Mm.
be able to put out just like nature and wildlife and get out and do stuff, have fun,
Mm.
it's amazing because you're leaving an impact on these young kids and they get to see what's really out there. And it's not just all about what happens at school and what happens in their house, but if they're going through problems,
Nailed
they
it.
can go out and experience the wilderness. And I know me personally, some of the most intimate times I've had, because I'm Christian with God, is when I
Mm-hmm.
go out into the wilderness and I'm
Mm.
just one on one with nature. And
Mm.
typically when that happens, I'm out on a jog, but still
Mm.
just going out and jogging and being in the fresh air and seeing
Yeah,
stuff and coming across the possum that crosses your path, it just makes you appreciate the real
it
things in
does.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, and it steps you out of the what all the young kids are calling it today, the matrix. But like the thing
Hmm.
is that like Ray, like Donny, and shout out to those awesome guys, like Bear Grylls, like Cody Lundeen, like everybody. Whenever humans are lost, like if a human has their stuff together, they're not
Hmm.
going to be on TikTok for 7 hours a day. They're not going to
Yep.
be in the bars. They're not going to be here. And I just know myself because when I first started on social media, it wasn't a big thing like you,
Hmm.
2008, 2009. It was more of a fad. Phones looked a lot like potatoes. You know what I mean? There was nothing you could really do with it. But then as it developed, I went through a pretty bad period in my life in 2008. The economy collapsed, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. I was hunting at the time, shooting as well, and kind of went through some misfortunes in that. Not myself personally, I really enjoyed shooting, but people around me started to not look at it the same way. So I said, okay, right, well then I'm now lost. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm suffering from sleep rebellion. Where do you go? And next
Mm-hmm.
of all, this beastie comes out. And only for the first 2 weeks when I turned that on, that I remember I sat down and in the back when YouTube's algorithm was totally great, in my suggested feed, because I'd looked at hunting videos, up pops this Swedish gentleman who became a great friend of mine, a guy called Johan Skulman, fantastic mentor,
Mm-hmm.
great guy, wealth of experience. His video popped up and I just clicked it. He looked cool. He was in the snow. He had a big park on. You know what I mean? I said, grand. Before I knew it, the sun was coming up and I was totally hooked. And
Mm-hmm.
to use a Christian terminology, how would you could say saved? I must have watched
Mm-hmm.
maybe 50 videos that night. Everybody from Willie Mantis to Chris Tanner to Dave Canterbury to everybody, just Lonnie from Far North Bushcraft. Great people to call friends these days too.
Yeah.
But isn't that what it's all about? People kind of get mixed up in this. Why should I do YouTube? Why should I do this? Because would you not like to be that person that
Mm-hmm.
like that I found? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's like you said with the good. It's great when somebody pops on and say, "Hey, I found your video and I really liked it, and now I decided to go hiking this weekend."
Mm-hmm.
That is the best compliment. Whatever about views and subscribers and everything. And to me, regardless of people's personal interests, that's what people like your previous guests, like Donnie and like Ray and like
Mm-hmm.
everybody, that's really what they do. And you should always kind of keep that in mind. You want to be that safe space for somebody who
Yeah.
kind of wanders in. And people find bushcraft and they find survival at different times of their life. And then sometimes they go back to doing what they're doing. But I don't know how many people have come to courses and, sat down around the fire and had that bit of fireside
Mm-hmm.
kind of chats and banters and reconnected with themselves and then, or made some lifelong friends and then went off and done something else.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a permanent place where people stay, but it's great to have people like myself and yourself that sit around that campfire permanently and keep it burning, and people can
Yeah.
sit at it all the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the bad. As much as I don't want to, because I really am enjoying just the discussion. And I don't like to focus on the negatives of any
Mhm.
situation.
Well, they do
I try to,
exist.
yeah, they do exist, but I try to
Mhm.
keep it on the scary moments.
Aha.
So let's like when I was out here filming yesterday, I thought there was a bear next to me. It turns out it was just a big cow. Because I'm in a
Oh.
bear reserve, my first thought went to that it was a bear. Um,
Yeah, totally.
but stories like that where it was potentially dangerous or is dangerous,
Mm.
and just more scary moments that have happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, to quote Ray, because I know Ray is fond of saying it, that like there's no you either win or you lose, and both are a lesson. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? So I'll happily share a similar story to that. I have for your viewers who may see, I have maybe because the light, but I have a scar that runs across this fresh tattoo just here, and that's a story that I like to tell at classes as well because it's one that really brought a lot of clarity into what it is that we do.
Hmm.
Because you know yourself, if you have small children or anybody, and you tell a human that there's wet paint on the wall until they touch it, they don't know.
Yeah.
Some do, but most people will have to touch it. Same with fire being hot. So it had been 2 or 3 years into my outdoor journey, and I'd begun camping every weekend and practicing my skills and taking photos for the purpose of social media. I
Hmm.
defined the two transitions between there. Life when I just went out woods camping to share with friends, and then life when I went out to the woods to share on
Hmm.
social media. So I was out in the woods and we were building this beautiful camp, and I had set some tasks in my head and I was super tired. I was working in the port at the time, driving shipside cranes, and I finished a 12-hour shift that particular night and wouldn't miss my days worth of camping. So, shot out to the woods
Hmm.
and went out there. We were all gathered around and there wasn't enough firewood, and I was extremely tired, extremely dehydrated too. And I said, do you know what, guys, don't worry about it. I'll just get the firewood. And off I went walking into the distance with my bow saw and my axe. Thankfully, someone was watching over me and I wasn't using my axe. So I was just sawing wood willy nilly, had no gloves on, was tired, wasn't paying attention, cutting rounds. And then the bow saw, which I'd used 100 times over, 100 times
Hmm.
before, skipped out of this piece of wood and went straight across the top of my hand.
Ooh.
It just opened my hand up from knuckle to knuckle. You know what I mean? Split me like a sheet. And anybody who's ever cut themselves with a saw know that it's not a straight cut either.
Hmm.
It was pretty gnarly. And I thought to myself, and I'm also a hemophiliac. I have von Willebrand's. Now I'm maybe 100 meters away from camp. I told nobody where I was going. I didn't inform any of my friends. I didn't have any first aid equipment on me at all because this is something I'd done 100 times before. I was like, oh no, no. And then I started thinking about videos I'd seen on it, looking at there wasn't that much blood, so it wasn't so messy. But I did get scared. I did
Mm-hmm.
get scared. And then once I'd kind of calmed myself down, I said, right, I held my arm up and kept it elevated, and I said, okay, I'm going to have to walk back to camp. And there's two options. I'm going to walk back into camp, and I don't know how these guys react because we hadn't communicated with a group. We
Yeah.
haven't actually sat down and had serious conversations about these situations before. So, are they going to faint when they can see knuckle and bone? And you know what I mean? Or like we're out in the middle of the woods, or do any of them have first aid kits? Never had that conversation with anybody I camped with either. What was anybody's
Mm-hmm.
level of training? Because that's naff, because we're all blokes, we're all men, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So who talks about that? Just rub some dirt on you, you'll be fine. That kind of stuff. So I walked 100 meters back to camp, and I came in and I said that my hand was badly damaged, and I could see some people were, you know, two of the guys are a bit kind of, oh, what's going on and stuff. And I said, here, look, it'll be fine. Someone needs to get my first aid kit. Do you think my first aid kit was marked? No, it's just some random dry bag in my bag. And I'm thinking to myself, God, if I had to cut an artery, I could have crossed a thumb or removed a finger. I said, I'm in serious trouble now. I
Yeah.
mean, I still was in serious trouble. I could have been in even worse trouble. So the guys rummage around, they find my first aid kit. I do myself up. Thankfully, I had basic first aid training at that time because I am a hemophiliac. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm like, oh, we'll see if it stops bleeding and we'll make a call about whether to go to the hospital. But I said, chances are I'm going to bleed through my bandage.
Mm-hmm.
I had some butterfly stitches on and everything. So I said, does anybody here have any basic triangular dressings, anything at all? People started pulling out first aid kits. They had one ibuprofen, maybe a Lemsip, you know, like all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I couldn't believe it. So luckily, we always made the decision to never camp too far from the cars, never too
Mm-hmm.
far off trail. You don't need to be, you know, so too far off trail. So my friend, who I'm actually teaching with tomorrow with a course, drove me to the hospital where I got seen. They gave me a load of dressings. They put a few stitches in for me just to hold it together. And I was back at camp before the sun went down. But that was one of many, many lessons that taught me, like, hey, you know, you really need to take this kind of stuff seriously. That, you know,
Yeah.
complacency in the woods, and it's, you know, again, like seems to be the theme of this, like pride and ego and stuff has no place in that. I mean, I was more experienced than most, you know, wasn't as experienced as some, but and the four of us together collectively could definitely survive or bushcraft our way out of most situations. But we had no first aid kits, no plans. We never had any conversations before we went to the woods about what we could do, what we couldn't do, who carried what. Very minimal training, and there, but for someone was watching over me. I mean, I may not have
Mm-hmm.
walked out of that forest a millimeter this way or another bit that way, or a lapse in concentration, and Lord knows what could have happened. So that was that I find, and then what I found was is that it's what inspired me to get into instructing what I do as well. Is that so many people out there will focus on fire, like we talked about, will focus on water, will focus on fitness, but everybody passes over navigation and first
Mm-hmm.
aid, and first aid isn't cool or sexy until you're cut or lost, you know.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I really became super niched in because of that very, very scary and very real moment.
Yeah, and that's really good to not for the sake of the injury, but it was a lesson that was learned. Um,
Mm,
and I guess we could say that that's a lesson that you would have never. What am I trying to say? You wouldn't have figured out what to do unless something happened,
yeah.
and so it was able to put you in a presence of knowing what you needed to do. And I was when I first started going out and looking for reptiles. I
Mm,
wasn't really on like the haughty side. I had grown up my whole life in Arizona, so I knew like reptiles and snakes.
mm.
But I was insistent that I wouldn't need to bring out a venom kit and
Oh, yeah. I mean,
use a snake hook. But I
mm,
got about maybe 3 or 4 months into going out and looking for stuff, and
mm,
I finally heeded the words of my wife, and I got a
mm.
venom removal kit, and I got a snake hook, and I didn't just get a little snake hook. I got one that can actually close around the viper, so I don't get
Yeah.
bit. And just more recently, I actually got a blood clotting kit, and I keep all of it in
Mm,
my backpack. because I'm the clumsiest person on the planet. And so I want to make sure I'm safe. But yeah, even it took my wife harping down my neck, I would say, in a good way to get this equipment. Because in my mind, I was like, that's not necessary. Why do
Yeah,
I need to have a blood clotting kit? Why do I need a venom kit? I'm not going to get bit.
yeah,
And you think that until you're out there and you get bit by a viper and there's nothing you can do.
yeah,
And when you're out herping, sometimes I'm 2 or 3 miles back in the woods. And what do you do if you get bit by a copperhead or a rattlesnake? You
yeah,
can't
yeah.
make it back to your vehicle. You just basically ask for forgiveness and wait it out.
Ask for forgiveness. I love that. That's one that I'm going to take with me. But it is the truth. It's and you can run on for a long time, but sooner or later it's going to cut you down. Like
Hmm.
it's, I can understand if you if you go fishing once or twice a year. Yes, always have buoyancy protectors and
Hmm.
everything else. But if you're getting into this super seriously, and I say if someone finds themselves out at least once or every month or once every 2 months, well then you really are just stacking the numbers. Like you said,
Hmm.
you don't realize how far you can walk into the woods. 2 3 miles is a long way to
Hmm.
walk out if you have a sprained ankle, and it's 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 that whole wet paint mentality. And like I said, that one incident inspired all that I did then after it, to make sure that when we sit down, I'm one of few wilderness instructors that if I do teach a class that uh, I don't just have a first aid module. It's a constant throughout the class. I'm
Hmm.
constantly I tell people about the Left for Life, which is an American military thing where you
Hmm.
keep your first aid pouch. You would be surprised at the amount of hunters who run around with high caliber rifles and super sharp knives that don't know the Left for Life thing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Or aren't tourniquet trained. So even just that, even if someone walks away from one of my classes going, "Hey, yeah, Left for Life," Joe taught me that, and okay. And all the way through, like day two, people are walking around. I'm just doing spot checks. I'm like, "Hey, you got your Left for Life? Where is it?" If we're going to be
Hmm.
working with sharps, I ask people to have it there. And it's that repetition. And then I ain't saying that anybody's saving lives and stuff like that. It's up to everybody to do their own thing. But that all stemmed from that drop in the lake of my skills, was that
Yeah.
very bad experience where I damn near chopped my own hand off. And thankfully didn't do it. And it wasn't televised on TV either. So I got to
Yeah.
walk away from it, with a bit of dignity.
All right. I actually had a friend who couldn't attend a camping trip because of a similar,
Mm,
not like he wasn't out sawing or anything, but he had got up super early in the morning and was trying to come out camping with us.
mm,
And he was a sharp knife fanatic. And he
mm.
had like an 8-inch Bowie knife, and he had just got
Oof.
done sharpening it. And he went to pull it off of his belt from the clip to
Mm,
put it in his truck, and it
mm.
unsheathed instead. And he almost cut his finger off, and he said like blood sprayed all over the roof of his truck, and so he
Yeah.
was never able to attend the trip. And he came back with his finger all bandaged up after the trip, and he was all upset that we went without him. And we were like, we weren't gonna wait for you. We planned this for
Yeah,
two
that's it.
months. You're the
That's
one who
it.
almost cut your finger off.
A lesson learned. A lesson learned.
Uh-huh.
And it happens super easy. I once had a friend, and he went to a camp, and he was wandering around in the night, and that's when most stuff happens. I've seen people walk into a branch and gouge themselves across
Hmm.
here, and I think again the more, because now, like for example, this season, my season starts next week. So from next
Hmm.
Saturday, I'm in a different country every weekend, and I'm either teaching or speaking. And when you're around that many people, you'll be surprised how many people fall over logs, or cut
Hmm.
their fingers, or do those type of things, walk into trees. It's a very common thing. And this one though was one of the more interesting ones, because he had got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And again, situational awareness, you kind of need to know where you are. And there was a bridge that they had come across into this beautiful
Hmm.
camping site. Now, I imagine, and I don't drink when I'm at camp. I don't drink most of the time. I'm a teetotaler. I'll have a
Hmm.
celebration whiskey every now and again, but for the rest of the
Yeah.
time, I stay away from it, because I'm a ex-addict, so I tend to just stay away. But I can imagine he had one or two beers, being the type of guy that he is. He's a great guy, and he went to use to the bath to go to the bathroom, and that was a couple of hours. And again, this situational awareness thing, everybody else was kind of half cut too. Everybody
Hmm.
else had a few beers and them stuff, and didn't notice that, we'll call him Johnny for the sake of argument, that Johnny was gone for like 2 hours. You know what I mean? His friends had no clue where he had been. But what had happened is that he'd wandered a little bit too far in the dark, as does happen. And he went to sit down on a stump just to catch his breath, maybe feel the wind on his face, maybe, relieve himself. But when he stood up, he kind of lost, or sat back, he kind of lost his balance. He wasn't on a stump. He was on the bridge, and he went into the river in
Oh.
the middle of the night, and the river was about this deep, So he hit his head and passed out, and then eventually came stumbling back into camp all of his own accord, but for the grace of God, you know what I mean? So you have to really kind of keep those things in mind. But I think if you surround yourself in an echo chamber where you only have four friends who go camping all the time and never injured themselves, you aren't really aware of the
Mm-hmm.
dangers that are out there. It's only when you I once was at a class one time, and this stuck with me because this gentleman had loads of experience. The things to it taught me to watch out for things when people are tired and people are confused. And he had a wealth of experience. He was a farmer, ex-military guy, and he was at this course. I won't mention the country, but we were at this course. It was a 72-hour survival course. And he went wandering away, and he was with his son. So you can imagine the stress he's under. He's with his son. He's tired. He's trying to build his shelter. We're
Mm-hmm.
into day 2 of fasting, so on and so forth. And he came walking back to the lesson. And this is where you kind of have to, if it's not your friends, it's also everybody else, especially if you're an instructor. And I do always get there before my lessons, and I like to sit down and just kind of center myself, figure out what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
and read the room, because you might have a lesson, but I like to adjust it as the audience goes. Some people might be more interested in one thing or the other. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of figuring out. And this gentleman came walking back, and I noticed that he was staggering a bit. He was a bit flushed in the face, and he was talking to his son. And then he turned to adjust his chair to sit down on, and he had an unsheathed knife in his pocket, blade up,
Oh.
and he was about to sit down on that chair. And I said to him, I said, whoa, 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 and nobody moving off. I said, you can't be doing that. And he's like, oh, no, I carry it like that all the time. And then we got into an altercation just because he was, I can understand he was under a lot of stress. But I ended up saying, hey, you can't do that. And he eventually left the class, and I think it was for the better, but
Yeah.
only for I was watching for that. He would have sat down, and it was a filleting knife too. It was more a filleting knife. So I dread to think about what could have happened. And that
Yeah.
stuff happens constantly.
Yeah, and that's not a knife you want to get jabbed with either.
No,
No,
but
not at
I
all.
learned a valuable lesson from it, because I was with a team of instructors and learning my way up at this particular time. And I said to myself, right, let's just take a look at the scene in general. And besides America, I would say America has, maybe because it's insurance and lawsuits, we don't have that so much over here in Europe, but maybe because of that, most instructors, like shout out, I have to give some shout outs to say, like Jeff Hatch, you should contact him. He's a great guy to get on the show. Jeff Hatch from Raven Wilderness School, Joshua Enyart, you know what I mean? All these great guys. They are so like 20% more medically trained than they need to be. But it was that particular moment with that gentleman, and I'm thankful for what he did. He may seem to think he was a bit foolish, or we may not be friends after the altercation that we had, but he then taught me that's like, hey, in a couple of years' time, when I plan to teach my own classes, I wouldn't have been able to deal with that, only for I had these people here with me, putting a bit of pressure on it. And, how do you tourniquet a stabbed hip and stuff? And I'm like, oh, okay. So after that incident, I spent so much more time upgrading my own skills, and now I'm up to emergency wilderness EMT level. So you can learn from these things. So I'm very grateful that it happened, but you have to stay above your game. That's one thing I'd recommend to your audience too, if they are going to do a class, especially a survival class, if you want to find out the mettle of who you're going to, ask for their medical qualifications when it comes to these things.
Yeah, and we're with what we do here. I just moved here to Florida, but we really like doing like adventures. And my brother, he's more into scuba diving. I'm more into reptiles, and then we both do the fossil thing. But I plan on coming out here now that we're in Florida and getting my venomous snake certification, so that way I can be properly trained in that. And then we both plan on getting our scuba diving classes taken care of, and just so that way we can be properly trained in those situations and know what to do. And for the sake of being able to properly teach the audience what they need to know, we can't just like pick up a snake and tell them we're handling it this way just because, but actually be able to tell them why to handle them this way. And if you're going to pick them up, which we don't recommend doing unless you're trained, but if you're going to pick them up, handle them in a proper manner. But yeah, make sure, I totally agree, making sure that you're well trained for your circumstance, even if you don't need it. It's because you never know when that circumstance is going to need it. So
Oh, definitely. And they'd be two of many ugly stories that I would have for sure.
All right, well, let's go ahead and lighten the mood from the injury stories to the hilarious stories, if there's any left, because I know you've already told some hilarious stories. But if you have any hilarious stories left, what some stories from going out and surviving, whether as an instructor or in your personal life, that just make you laugh every time you think of it?
Well, yeah, of course. Well, there was one story where my life flashed before my eyes, and it was at a convention. It was again bow drills. I was asked to go do some bow drills at this convention. I won't say the city or I won't say the country because people figure it out. But it was in Europe, down south by the equator, very, very warm, and I was so nervous. I was super, super nervous, and it's one of those moments. This is one where like when you're driving along and you think about this thing and then you get that shiver up your spine where you just go, huh. It's one of those stories. But I've learned to recount it. I've overcome the trauma. So I'm there and I got my mentor and the instructors behind me and the instructors who were in with the country with as well, because that's what I do. I travel to other schools. And we're at this convention and there's probably maybe, I say 100 people, because the guys who I was with were also big names too. They weren't all there for me, but it was a collective audience of about 100, 150 people. And Joe has to start doing a bow drill. Now, I've never worked with clematis before. Have you worked with clematis at all? Have you seen clematis?
No.
It's basically ivy. It's like that ivy that wraps around trees. It's great for hand drills, great for bow drills, but it's incredibly fragile. I wasn't informed of this and missed this memo at this beginning stage of the game. So I have this audience here in front of me. And there's one thing that's absolutely horrible if you're teaching bow drill or you're going to demonstrate it, when you hear that squeak at the start. There's nothing louder than that squeak. It's almost like when you're shooting, that saying, the two loudest sounds you can hear when you're shooting is a bang when you expect a click and a click when you expect a bang. It's the same with the squeaky bow drill thing. So I'm sitting there and I'm talking through it. This is how you cut in the notch and so on. And then I sit down to do it and it's and I'm like, oh God, the sound is deafening. And you can hear, kind of like in church, that toddler crying in the distance. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh God, the pressure. And I actually got it going so hard, but unfortunately the hardboard had split because it was only maybe 10 millimeter thick, and it just split, and this coal was on this carpet and people are watching me, and it was also being recorded live by like all these influencers who were in this country, like, you know what I mean? Because I came out and I was like, oh, you're going to record a video, make sure you make me look good. And they were like, no, all live. I was like, oh God. So this had happened, but you can always recover, and it was a very, very valuable lesson. So I said, right, okay, I'll get on this one a second time. And anybody who's done bow drill knows that when you start getting tight and tense, and you have your spindle and your foot you're not paying attention to things, spindles tend to fly off in different directions. So at this stage of the game, I encouraged the audience to move a bit closer, to get in, see what I was doing, bit of deflection. And the audience became super close, maybe about 2 meters away, about 8 feet. And I started on the bow drill, and like, whack, 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 whack. And I can see it in a slow motion in my head now to this day. And I was like, whack, 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 whack. And next of all, the spindle takes off like 2001: A Space Odyssey, slow motion, just looping through the air, cracks this toddler right in the center of the face. And the dad is older, and I'm like, oh, and I could just see it, and I was just looking around in my life, but like, fair play to the guy. She didn't cry. She's a tough little lady. She was. He handed the spindle back to me. I was like, thank you very much. And then people were like, okay, we don't know who you are, but you better nail this on this third attempt. And I willed that cold into existence. But still to this day, like I said, I'll be sitting in the car and go, when I think back on it. Taught me a very valuable lesson. Very valuable lesson.
There was a moment, and there was no lesson learned from this besides don't throw rocks. I was probably like 13 years old, and I was at a youth camp, and there's a kid sitting like maybe 100 feet away, and he's not facing me. He's actually facing perpendicular to me, so he's looking to my left, and I'm facing him. And I'm like, I don't know why, being a kid, I was like, I'm going to throw a rock at him. And I threw this rock and somehow perfectly whacked him in the middle of the forehead, even though he wasn't facing me. And I didn't know whether to laugh or feel bad or what to do, because I didn't expect to hit him from that distance and then to nail him in the forehead. And he came up, and there was a perfect bloody dot dead center of his forehead. Like I just apologized. Like, what do you do in that situation? And I haven't thrown a rock at somebody since. So it just
That's it. And it's the same. Whenever I do bow drill demos now, I make sure that, there's like Moses part in the Red Sea, that there's a bit of a gap between me and where that's going to go. But it's, again, like I said, bow drill, to bring us full circle, will always humble you. I'll share with you a story I've never shared with anybody before, just because, it's been a great conversation and I know you're pressed for time.
Awesome. Thank you.
But I was at a Pathfinder class when I was a Pathfinder instructor and coming up the ranks of the Pathfinder school. And the one thing that Dave definitely is, regardless of anybody's opinion of him, well, one, he's a friend, but also he will not let anything beat him. Anything. If he's doing a lesson, that lesson is being finished. You are getting start, middle, and you're getting the end. And it's a testament, because some people will walk away, but Dave will never walk away from a lesson, regardless of what people say. Now, I was unaware of this level of, some could call it stubbornness, some could call it commitment at the time. So we're there at this particular class. And at this particular class, especially because Dave is so popular, is that when he was traveling around Europe at the time, you had influencers amongst other students. So you had people who had other schools of their own, big YouTube channels, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great lesson on how to deal with pressure in such classes. So this was a basic class. Bow drills went on this class,
Yeah.
And we got through the class navigation and everything else. And then at the end of the class, everybody's getting together, clinking glasses, and things are nice. Dave comes over to me and goes, "Joe, people want to see a bow drill." I said, "Dave, I'm exhausted." It's the end of it. He's like, "Yeah, but we got to give him a bow drill. You definitely get their money's worth out of course." So I said, "Okay, yeah, no problem. Where am I supposed to get this bow drill?" And I won't lie to you, we were up in the middle of the Alps. I've never bow drilled in the Alps before. Do you know what I mean? And he's like, "Oh, garnish it from the forest." I was like, "Yeah, okay, fine." So I run off into the Alps with my little backhoe saw, and I come back with something like a set. I'm there making the set. And next of all, I'm tired again. Always happens, tired, a little hungry, et cetera, et cetera. Knife skips out of the set, cuts me right across the finger. You know what I mean? Just cushion out of it. Dave comes over, puts some duct tape on it, wraps some bandages around it. We'll be good. We got to get this done, because this crowd had now formed for this boat.
Yeah.
That was going to take place. Now, unbeknownst to myself, I had grabbed possibly the most hateful, most spiteful, most vengeful piece of wood that was in the Alps to be found. And I know there's a video of this somewhere. And I sat down to do it. And you're hearing that squeak again. You know what I mean? I'm tired. I'm just not putting my pressure. Stuff isn't right. There is smoke and I'm getting it. And everybody's around and they're watching, and some people even start cheering. And I'm like, "Oh, this is great." All smoke, loads of coal, loads of dust, no coal. I said, "Oh God." And we're on the side of a mountain. It's like this, by the way. You know what I mean? So I'm like, "Okay, cool." So then I try again. No, nothing works. And I'm like, "Oh no." And then Dave comes over to me and he's like, "Can't get that coal, can you?" I said, "I can. It's a stubborn set." You know what I mean? And then next of all, it became like this wrestling match between the two of us. Like, "Do you want to jump in?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, I'll jump in." So now two of us are on this set. Whap, 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 whap. This big audience is around us. We're going for it, hell and leather. He's on his knees. I'm on my knees. We're like, and it doesn't happen. And it's like, again, loads of dust, no coal. Couldn't figure it out for the life of us. I mean, both of us are pretty good at what we do, but this wood was it was cursed. So I was like, okay. And then again, people are standing there, they're watching, and we're like, and Dave is like, "Are you going to give up?" I'm like, "No, Dave, I'm not going to give up." "Are you going to give up?" He's like, "I'm not giving up." So back onto the set we went again. And somebody, and whoever it was, I cursed them as well to this day, gave Dave an SE fire steel. You know, those triangular fire steels that SE make, the bits of metal. Those get super hot. My hand is on the bottom. Dave's big paws on the top here, and he's like, "Great, we're going again." And I still, it's like that Home Alone scene. You know, the SE logo was welded into my hand. But we went at that for 45 minutes. And then we got a coal. And then someone hands this grass bundle out of nowhere across the crowd. This grass bundle comes. I put it into the coal. I'm shaking. I'm exhausted. I blow it, and the coal just goes straight out the back of the bundle. I'm like, And then back on the set we were again. But an hour in, we got a coal. And you can see there's a speed lapse video of it somewhere on the internet. I don't know where it is. But people come and people go and people go. But it taught me such a valuable lesson. It was a really valuable lesson. And although at the time I wish the earth would just swallow me up and take me away, it is one of the moments that I look back on and think, because again, bringing us full circle, I've never forgotten that I was that guy on the couch,
Yeah.
So to be here in this area, surrounded by these people, with somebody who was an idol and a mentor to me at the time, just 45 minutes on our hands and knees trying to get this thing, being filmed by people on our phones. I'll never forget it. But it was insane and it was intense, but it was definitely one of those memories that make me laugh. It cancels out the judders.
Yeah. Know? All right. And that being said, thank you for telling a story that you've never told before.
No, it's no problem.
That's the stuff I'm looking for, just to give that little bit of bonus content. And for those who are still listening to this point in the podcast, I think I will post this as a short version and a long version, an extended cut.
Sure.
So expect to see two when they're posted. But before we end the podcast, would you be able to, I probably know where you're going to go with this, but would you be able to give one piece of information for those who are wanting to go into survival situations? What's the most crucial piece of information they should learn?
Before in a survival situation, or before a survival? Do you mean prepare for one, or to
prepare? Yes. Like if you plan on going out and testing your own survival skills.
That's it. Well, the one thing that I will say the one piece of advice that I will give to add to the conversation of great advice that you've already got and will get in your future on the podcast. The one thing that I will say is do a genuine live scenario in your backyard, or do something somewhere else. But don't be sitting there thinking of this great plan that one day is going to come along. And it could be even something as simple as the amount of people that I do meet that have amazing 72-hour bags and bug out bags and so on, who've never had them on their back, who've never walked 2K with them in the city, let alone in the forest. And I know, because I speak from personal experience, that the first time I went out to do a live safe exercise, I could barely walk to where my bug out location was. I was in bits. I was so exhausted, so physically unfit, And then I started to take stuff out of my bag and rejig my system. I'm like, why do I need 24 ration packs? Do I really need them? Maybe I can learn to eat some berries and stuff like that. Do I need 6 knives? Do I need 20 boxes of cartridges? No, maybe I don't. So I recommend everybody, because it's good for your psyche, it's good for your health, and it's good for your future survival plans, should you have them in place, to get out there, put your backpack on, and actually go and try and do the things that you think can do. It's humbling.
Yeah, that just reminds me, one of the parks next to our house over here, it's not a camping park, but there was a dad and his daughter, and they put on full loaded up backpacks and were just hiking the forest back and forth. And at first I was like, what are they doing? Because there's no backpacking in here. But as we watched, we realized they're training. And it's not something that you think firsthand that you would need to train to go out and do that. But you do, especially when you have a 40 or a 60 liter backpack that's full of supplies. You're going to need to be fit for it. It's kind of like your own little military training. You got to get out there and you got to be able to hike a 20-degree cliff to the top and be able to make it there.
And it's a beautiful learning experience. And it's also, I mean, I know the sun is going down. It's been a great chat. But I mean, I learned to navigate in parks. My local park is where I learned to navigate. I used to put my backpack on in the evening times, and it was an excuse to get out of the house. And then I done a 1K route, a 4K route, a 12K route. And now I rook with, because I'm big into rooking, I rook with an 18-kilo loadout, and I can do 12K. Not at a pace, but I can do it quite comfortably. But it started with my first 500 meters with my 40K backpack on the ground. So no, definitely get out and do it. It's a great excuse to get out of the house. There's nothing wrong with that either at the end of the day.
All right. Well, that being said, we do got to cut an end to the podcast. But thank you for that bit of advice. My brother's been wanting to get into backpacking, and so is my uncle. So I'm sure they'll appreciate that as well as the future survivalists and experts that are watching the podcast.
That's it. Enjoy it.
But I did want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been an honor hearing your stories and getting to meet someone who essentially is, I would say, a trainer to those that everyone else looks up to. Because you never get to hear about the instructor. You always see the person, but you never hear about the instructor. So that's really honorable to be able to do a podcast with you. So thank you.
And I appreciate that, and the same to you. And I wish you the best of luck on your venture in the future. And if I can be of any help, let me know. And then also as well, reach out to me afterwards, and we'll see if we can do something for your listeners and help your show out a little bit as well.
All right. Awesome. And I'll make sure to post that separately on my Instagram as well. But thanks for coming on. It's been awesome hearing your stories.
It's been great talking to you, Daniel. I hope you have a great day.
All right. You too.
All right. Take care, my friend.
All right, everyone. That's it for this episode with Joe Price, and I hope you guys enjoyed his stories as much as I did. I know I am getting really sweaty out here in the Florida sun, so I'm ready to go home and relax in the cool air. But if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and I will see you on the next podcast.